Right now we're slow walking through the Psalms, and this month in particular, we are looking at Messianic Psalms as we celebrate Jesus for Christmas. This month is, and every month really, is all about Jesus, but Christmas is all about Jesus, and all the celebration is about him. And when Jesus taught the Bible, he went to the Old Testament and he went to the Psalms in particular and showed his disciples all the things about himself. And this is one of the Psalms for sure that he would have talked about, because he talked about it prior to that time as he was interfacing with his interrogators at the temple. Psalm 110 is our text today, and I invite you to join me there. The Lord said unto my Lord, verse 1, this is a Psalm of David, and we're going to look probably just at verse 1 today. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. So a couple of thoughts I want to dive into. The Lord, capital L, anytime you see capital L, Lord in the Old Testament, that's the official, proper name of God. In Hebrew, it would be Yahweh, or we would say Yahweh or Jehovah. That's his name. So Yahweh, Jehovah, said unto my Lord. You notice capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D in the first one. The next one is a capital L and the rest is lowercase. So he's now referencing his personal Lord. What is he saying? Nothing more than God, nothing less, I should say, than God the Father said to God the Son. And Jesus brought this very verse up when he was arguing his deity with his interrogators, the Pharisees, Sadducees, priests, lawyers, scribes, at the temple the week he was crucified. And he said, if David what he was instructing was that David understood that his future son, king, would be God, would be his Lord becoming a king, becoming flesh and living a human life and becoming an eternal king, that it would be God, Messiah. David understood that. That's mind-blowing, okay? That David understood and had this revelation that God would become man. And through his line, God would be born. And so that's profound. There's just so much there that David understood the incarnation, that David understood the essence of the gospel being the deity of Jesus Christ, that Jesus was not just a good man, that Jesus was not just a teacher, but that Jesus was God in a body through his lineage as the heir to the throne of the whole world, but coming as Messiah and coming as Redeemer. We've studied in this podcast before how that David understood the essence of substitutionary atonement. So David would have understood that this coming leader, this coming Messiah, and he says it later in the Psalm, was not only a king, a conquering hero, but that he would be the ultimate and final priest, that he would be the high priest, that he would be the one way that men would have access to God, that he would be the ultimate king and the ultimate priest. David understood that the priesthood and the kinghood, I'm making that word up, both represented a greater. Flawed human kings and flawed human priests both pointed to a greater fulfillment in Jesus. So we studied yesterday, Jesus is the fulfillment. He is the ultimate king, final king, and only good, perfect king, holy king. But he's also the ultimate priest, high priest. And I want you to catch this at the end of verse 1. Sit thou, so this is what God said to Jesus. Sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. So somehow in this plan, let's just think for a minute about this conversation. Somehow in this ancient eternal conversation, this eternity past conversation between the Father and the Son. The Father, we saw in Psalm 22, I believe, how that he said he was going to make his Son a covenant for all people, Gentiles and the heathen included. He was going to make him a covenant. We see here him saying, at some point, you're going to sit at my right hand for a time until. So that until, that word until, is a gap. It's a span of time, okay? And God is saying to Jesus, sit here next to me until. So apparently Jesus went and did something and is returning to sit, and he's going to sit for a time until that span of time, and then God is going to, he says, I make thine enemies thy footstool. And verse 2 clarifies, the Lord shall, so this is future, it's certain, it's stronger than will, shall, sometimes we think of will as, hopefully, but when God says shall or will, it's for sure, okay? Shall is just a stronger emphasis of will. The Lord shall send, but it's still future, it hasn't happened yet, shall send the rod of thy strength out of Zion. There's going to be, what God is saying to Jesus, a consummation event where all of your enemies will be subdued. God, Lord, Yahweh, Jehovah, will send the rod of his strength out of Zion, that hill in Jerusalem. And then God says, rule thou in the midst of thine enemies. So it's now, I hope I'm not taking this too far, but my sense of this is that Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God, somehow ruling in the midst of his enemies. So notice verse 1. At the end of verse 1, the enemies are subdued. They're under him. But at the end of verse 2, kind of in this in-between time, the enemies are around him. Rule thou in the midst of thine enemies. So what we see in verses 1 and 2 is really the essence of what Jesus said, that he would go away, that his church would grow, the kingdom, that his kingdom would be like a mustard seed that would grow into a tree, and the fowls of the air would come and lodge, and it would grow and grow and grow, and like a little leaven in a lump, or not leaven, but like a growing lump. I'm trying to remember extemporaneously all these illustrations that Jesus used. Forgive me. But he talked about the kingdom starting small and growing, okay, over time. And that period of time is where we are right now. Remember when Stephen was stoned early in the book of Acts, and as he's dying, he sees Jesus at the right hand, okay, of God. And he was standing at that moment, but God said to Jesus, when you return, you're going to sit at my right hand for a time until the consummation. Your enemies are made your footstool. Until God the Father sends out the rod, the conquering rod of strength, victory, warring, bringing enemies under subjection. Until then, what is Jesus doing? He's ruling in the midst of the enemies. He's ruling, hopefully, in your heart and in mine. He's ruling in our churches. He's ruling really in time and space in ways we don't fully understand or comprehend, but that rule has not been consummated. That kingdom has not been consummated. It's in formation. Every soul you lead to Christ, every seed you plant for the gospel, every loving deed you do in honor to the Lord or in love for others is a seed you're planting in that growing kingdom. But one day it will, in a cataclysmic sequence of events, in prophetic timeline, it will be consummated, and his enemies will be subdued and subjected, and he will rule. But here's the takeaway. Here's the thing I want to drive home to you as we wrap up. Jesus right now is in a waiting mode on God the Father's timeline. Acts chapter 1 said it's not for us to know the times and seasons, but these things the Father's kept to himself for his own determination. So if you ever feel like you're waiting for God to come through, you're waiting for God's plan to unfold, if you ever feel like you don't understand God's timeline and it's causing you to lose hope or to be frustrated, just step back and think for a minute. Jesus is waiting too. And he is on the same timeline that you and I are on. he hasn't seen the consummation of his kingdom or his establishment with all of his enemies subdued and final judgment being passed and that eternal kingdom being made visible and physical and tangible. But he will. God will accomplish these things. And we celebrate at Christmas the arrival of God onto the planet, but we also celebrate the promise of all that means for us in the gospel, but all that will mean for us. It means today he is my priest. As my Lord, he's also my priest, my mediator, and one day he will be a physical, visible with my eyes, touchable, tangible, reigning king in a new kingdom, in a new heaven and a new earth. So my friend, just like Jesus is sitting at God's right hand, you can sit restfully before him, in him, waiting on him. Today, we are on God's timeline, and God is handling all things well. And that is enough for today. I'm so glad that you joined me today, and I really hope that you have a great Tuesday. And I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. Maybe share this short devotion with somebody who could be encouraged by it. What a profound thought to think of David hearing a conversation by inspiration of this poem, this song, a conversation between God the Father and God the Son. And God the Father telling the Son, sit here and wait and rule in the midst of your enemies until I make the enemies your footstool. Friend, you might be surrounded by difficult circumstances right now, but one day you'll be standing victorious on top of those circumstances. And the sweetest victories are the ones that were fought with long patience, long endurance. They're the ones you'll celebrate the most. Those are the ones where God is doing his deepest work. So keep trusting him.